Well, good morning, everyone. It's really very good indeed to be back here at St. Paul's. And what David was saying about getting wet coming here reminds me of a sort of epiphany that happened, I think, about the same time that David was talking about, which was at chapter meetings here. We suddenly had on the agenda issues to do with flooding in the bottom of the cathedral. And for the first time in the history of St. Paul's, the Wren's drainage system wasn't coping. And the reason it wasn't coping was because of the advent of monsoon-like downpours. And I'm sure we're all getting used to them now. But what had to happen then was that the works department had to cut a channel in the roof just as an emergency overflow to allow water to shoot straight out. I can't remember exactly where it is, but if I did, then I would certainly avoid walking under there when there's a downpour in London, because it must absolutely be chucking it. But at that time, when I was at St. Paul's, I actually started working on theology of the sea, and I'm going to draw on that this morning. It was the theologian Tertullian who described Christianity as the religion of water. And what I'm going to try and do is give just a sense of why that might be so. There's so much to cover, I can't cover it all, but I want to just start with some very familiar words, which I think might put it all in context. The words are, "In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind swept over the face of the waters." And it's with these sonorous words that the Bible opens, and so also really does the story of Christians' story of creation, fall, and salvation. And that passage describes the original state from which the cosmos is created as a vast expanse of water, the deep. Earth is a formless void, but there's substance in the form of this primordial ocean. Nowhere in Genesis does it say, God created the deep. According to Genesis, before creation takes place, there is darkness and a void, and there is the deep, the surface of which is agitated by the Spirit of God as if by wind. So there's no real suggestion here that God is creating out of nothing, ex nihilo. That's a later concept, both in Christianity and Judaism. And if anything, there's a sense here of the deep as being eternal, coexisting with God. And the opening of Genesis clearly isn't a scientific description of creation, but I suggest neither is it really a creation myth. Rather, it's a statement of faith about the relationship between the Creator and creation. And the point that I think is being made very clearly and boldly is that the God of Israel is in total control of the cosmos. And I think the choice of symbolism is significant, because underlying the Genesis story is a profound sense that this primordial ocean lies mysteriously outside what was understood as the created order. The deep is something other. It's the chaos out of which God creates order to form the cosmos. It therefore represents what's otherwise uncontrollable and untamable. The point, I think, is being made that if the God of Israel is able to tame and control the deep, then that God is truly omnipotent. And this powerful image of the deep lies at the heart of the Judeo-Christian understanding of the sea. As Genesis goes on to describe, it's from the parting of the deep that the waters that cover the earth, the oceans, the seas and lakes are formed. And in Genesis, these vast expanses of water are seen as the remnants of chaos. And that brings a strong sense of uncontrolled, timeless otherness into our ordered, everyday existence. And this perception of the sea pre-existing our world isn't limited to ancient Israel. Similar ideas are found in creation stories elsewhere. But what's clear is the ancient Israelites were drawing on these pre-existing creation myths found in religions, neighbouring religions and cultures, and wove them with a distinctive Jewish theology. And what distinguishes the Genesis story from these others is that it portrays God as purposeful and firmly and serenely in control. If we look at the Ugaritic, Babylonian and other Middle Eastern myths, they speak instead of creation of the earth as an almost accidental byproduct of a violent cosmic battle involving sea gods. More akin, though, to the calmer Jewish understanding of creation is that found in Islam, where in the Quran, God is described, the throne of God is described as being upon water. And similarly, in the creation story in Hinduism, the divine swan Hamsa, swimming on primordial waters, hatches the golden egg of the earth. It explains why in India the divine presence is sometimes symbolized as a lotus leaf floating on water. And in a similar vein, stories that parallel that of Noah and the ark, as found in Genesis, are also widespread across religions, sharing a theme that humanity is purged and punished of its sinfulness by a divinely ordained flood. You can find these narratives in Islam, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, the religions of the Far East, among ancient stories of the indigenous peoples of Australia, the First Nation peoples of North America, Mayan and Aztec cultures in South America, the communities in Hawaii and other Pacific islands, and in Scandinavian, pre-Christian Celtic and classical Greco-Roman mythology. So it's very, very widespread. Of course, it's possible that some of these stories developed independently as people of different parts of the world sought to make sense of their experience of devastating floods through the lens of their particular religious beliefs. But it's also perhaps likely that the kernel of the story was transmitted across religions and cultures. And in the case of Genesis, again, we can probably see ancient Israelites drawing upon pre-existing stories shared across the Middle East and told in a way that sends out a strong theological message that the God of Israel has purged creation because of its rebelliousness and entered into a new covenantal relationship with humanity. What's immediately striking about Genesis and related Middle Eastern texts is how negatively the sea is portrayed. It's both chaotic, the deep, and destructive, the flood. And the more celebratory way that water is generally perceived in religion throws this negativity into sharp contrast. Water holds a special place in Islam, for example. The Quran states that water is the source of all life, with every living thing made from it. Also, for Muslims, pilgrimage on Hajj to Mecca requires a ritual to drink from the Zamzam well, which, according to Islamic belief, sprang up miraculously on the spot where the thirsty infant Ishmael stamped his foot. And the Bible too does speak frequently of the life-giving properties of water. Springs, wells, and fountains of living water and the waters of life appear in the Song of Songs, the prophecies of Jeremiah and Zechariah, John's Gospel, and the book of Revelation. Some biblical references to water are metaphorical, referring not only to the importance of water for sustaining life, but what refreshes people spiritually. And this imagery is used particularly to powerful effect in John's Gospel. For example, the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well, John 4:14, leads to the use of the symbolism of living water as representing eternal life, which is open to Jews and Gentiles alike, including, of course, the despised Samaritans. And in many religions, water is valued because of its cleansing properties. This is particularly the case in Hinduism, where the river Ganges, which flows from the Himalayas or the mountains of the gods, is of special significance. And some Hindus, of course, believe there's an imperative to bathe at least once a lifetime in the Ganges. And for centuries, holy springs and wells were widespread within Christianity, often at sites that were sacred to pre-Christian religions. And we can see this in many, many place names across this country, such as Holywell or Holywell wells. And some pilgrim sites associated with water, such as Lourdes, remain important today as places of healing, drawing on ideas associated with water's cleansing and life-giving properties. It isn't surprising, given the importance of potable water for sustaining life. And when St. Francis of Assisi wrote in his Canticle of the Sun, "Praised be thou, O Lord, for sister water, who is very useful, humble, precious and chaste," it's a significant prayer of thanksgiving, as of course pure, chaste water was vital for survival, something that is very easy to forget for those accustomed to good water supplies, but not for the 1.1 billion of the world's population for whom waterborne diseases is an everyday threat. And water too is found as a symbol for the soul, no doubt because of its association with life and because of its mysterious fluid properties and quixotic ability to evaporate into gas. Goethe's Song of the Spirits over Water puts it like this: "The spirit of man resembles water, coming from heaven, rising to heaven, and hither and thither to earth must then ever descend." The 19th century German philosopher and anthropologist Ludwig Feuerbach, who turned away from the church to become an atheist and an arch critic of Christianity, nevertheless argued that God was an outward projection of our inner nature and used water, or recognised water, as a powerful symbol. In his stinging critique of Christianity, at the essence of Christianity, he wrote this: "In baptism, water is the purest, clearest of liquids. In virtue of this, its natural character is the image of the spotless nature of the divine spirit. In short, water has a significance of itself as water. It is on account of its natural quality that it is consecrated and selected as the vehicle of the Holy Spirit." Now, I think it's interesting that the Bible doesn't make any clear distinction between fresh water and salty seawater. Although salty seawater is undrinkable, it was nevertheless important, as it obviously is today, as a source of food. Sea fishing provided a plentiful food supply, while salt, an important food preservative, was obtained by evaporating salty seawater from the cliffs of the world's saltiest sea, the Dead Sea. And this sea is called the Salt Sea in the Bible, and was also known in biblical times for its health-giving properties. And together, I think these factors suggest that the negative image of the sea that we get in the Bible is more to do with its wild, unpredictable nature than because it's undrinkable. And this emphasis on wildness is apparent in Genesis, where there's an implicit distinction between the sea and the ocean. The ocean is associated with primordial chaos, while the sea, along with lakes and rivers, is seen more as the product of that creation process of bringing order to that chaos. And this distinction owes much to the geography of the region where Judaism emerged. The ancient Israelites' understanding of the marine environment was limited by their knowledge and experience, which came primarily from navigation in and around the Mediterranean. And what sailors of the time were acutely aware of, as indeed sailors are today, is the considerable difference between the relatively calm, safe and tideless waters of the Mediterranean and the wild, dangerous and tidal waters of the Atlantic. And this distinction is most clearly expressed in classical mythology, in which the Pillars of Hercules, the European and North African promontories at the entrance of the Straits of Gibraltar provide not only a significant physical boundary between sea and ocean, but a spiritual boundary as well. They're also known as the gates of Hades. The Pillars of Hercules were perceived as the entrance to the underworld. Such was the association between the ocean and death and unknown. So although both sea and ocean are components of the biblical deep, there was a qualitative difference between the two in the minds of the ancient Middle Eastern and Mediterranean peoples. For Greeks, Romans, Jews and others, the untamed ocean was much closer to the chaotic state and to other worlds than was the more orderly, placid sea. The sea is what is created, the ocean being that remnant of the pre-existing chaotic deep. And then I want to say just a few words now about how this image of the deep as chaos, so strong in the Hebrew scriptures, plays its part in the New Testament. First of all, we can see allusions to it in the Gospels. As far as we're aware from ancient sources, it's only in Mark and Luke's Gospel that Lake Gennesaret is called the Sea of Galilee. We don't see any other source referring to this lake as a sea. We don't know why, but it's possibly theological, linking to what I've just been talking about. The sea being one step closer or nearer to chaos than a lake is. So the stories of Jesus calming the storm, and here's the storm, that's Rembrandt's picture of that, Jesus calming the storm and walking on water, might be described what I call miracles on the edge of chaos. Miracles that echo something of the opening passage in Genesis. Jesus walking on water, echoing the Spirit moving over the face of the waters. Jesus calming the storm, echoing with the Creator's control over the waters of chaos. So when the amazed disciples ask of Jesus in this story here, when he calms the storm, what sort of man is this? The answer, I think, verges on the Trinitarian. Jesus acts with divine power to control the most powerful symbol or manifestation of chaos. And there's also this mysterious bond between Jesus, the Creator, and the Spirit of God. I think Jesus' intervention in the world echoes that of the flood, but this time a new relationship between God and humanity is forged not out of destruction of almost all living things, but out of Jesus' sacrificial life and ministry. And the second image of water and chaos in the New Testament comes to its climax in the book of Revelation. Here we have a vivid description of a new creation and a very curious passage in chapter 21, verse 1. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. What Revelation isn't saying is that there's no water in the new creation. Far from it, because if you go on to chapter 22, it begins like this. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb through the middle of the streets of the city. On either side of the river is the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, producing its fruit each month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. Nothing accursed will be found there anymore. So in Revelation, when in this new creation, when creation is perfected, the waters of chaos, sea and ocean water, that's what's no more, whereas life-giving fresh water, the river of the water of life, is poured out by God to produce nourishment and healing. Well, I want to just draw to an end now, and there's so much more we could explore. We could explore the theology of baptism, we could look at the story of Jonah, we could delve into psalmody, hymnody, we could look at religious experience relating to water, we could look at natural theology and water. These are all things I've been working on, and there's loads of stuff there. But what I hope has come across this morning is that if we look at the sort of salvation narrative that we find in the Bible, then water plays a very important part. There's this suggestion that water pre-exists perhaps everything else in its chaotic form, that controlling it is very much associated with our creation, that it's used by God to purge sinful humanity, that Jesus reveals his divine powers by controlling it, and the culmination of a vision of perfected creation involves the wiping out waters of chaos, but nevertheless the presence of life-giving waters. And I think this sort of approach to theology that we find resonates so strongly with what is happening in the world today. That vision of a perfected creation is rather at odds with the reality of life on earth in the 21st century, when sea levels are rising. We're getting more of the hint of the flood than of the book of Revelation. Thank you.